not about the stupid laundry. It's about the lens that you're looking at how you operate your life.
Welcome back to Happiness in Progress. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award winner, former journalist, mom, wife, and just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. This podcast is brought to you by the Mail Tribune. Remember, this is the place to be to find more joy in your life, in the good, the bad, and the in-between. I want to remind you before we get going to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Come 2020, there will be video along with the audio on YouTube. Of course, you can still listen to audio just how you're listening to it right now, but I'm really excited to launch this part of the podcast. Okay, let's get to the episode because I cannot overstate how great today's episode is. Since interviewing Liz Earnshaw, I have been so excited to share this with you. Liz is a mom, wife, and therapist living in Philadelphia. She owns A Better Life Therapy, focused on helping people develop better relationships. As a licensed marriage and family therapist and certified Gottman therapist, she supports individuals and couples in the therapy room, through her courses, and on Instagram at Liz Listens to build better relationships with themselves so they can connect better with others. This episode is one of my favorites. I know I say that all the time, but I really believe this episode can be life-changing for you and your partner. And honestly, these tools can help with any relationship in your life. We talk about communication issues, of course, how to turn your complaints and criticism about your significant other into your needs. She shares some direct language you can use when bringing up conflict or stressors and how to fight right. Plus, she tells me 2/3 of all problems between couples are kind of unsolvable. 2/3 of problems unsolvable. Find out why this is and how you can live with someone and love that someone despite this. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm a therapist that practices marriage and family therapy in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I'm also a certified Gottman therapist. So I mostly, in my work in my office, I mostly work with couples and individuals that are struggling with relationship issues. But I also work with people on different spectrums of the relationship. So whether they're just starting out or they're in the middle of the relationship or a relationship has ended. So I see people across the entire spectrum. I own a practice in Philadelphia with a whole bunch of other fantastic therapists. And I also run an Instagram account and run some courses through that account. That account is at Liz Listens. And the most important part is I'm a mom and a wife, and I have a cute little boy.
So I love the work that you do. I think it's so important. I love that you have taken it to Instagram to even impact more people. Tell me a little bit about when people come to you. Is there, generally speaking, one or two issues that most couples are dealing with?
Most people come in and they haven't really pinpointed what their issue is. They know, they will say the kind of cliche, we have communication issues when they're filling out their paperwork or even when they first sit down. And usually a lot of the first couple sessions is figuring out what exactly that means. And what exactly it means is so different for so many people. Sometimes it's that they never really set good boundaries with each other. Sometimes it's that when they get into conflict, they really hit below the belt and they devolve their relationship because of that. And other times it's that they just aren't friends anymore. So they just don't talk to each other at all. But I would say that the most typical response is we're here because we have communication issues.
So how can someone, if they're listening, figure out, number one, what the issue is?
It can be challenging, and that's why a lot of people end up coming to couples therapy, is because when you're in something, it's like being in a Monet painting, right? And when you come to couples therapy, the therapist pulls you out of that painting and helps you to see the bigger picture. But what can really help is if you start sitting down with yourself, and this is a hack I give a lot of my clients, list out all the things you don't like. And we don't want to stay in that because a negative perspective of the relationship and your partner is never really helpful. But if you sit down and you list all of the things that are making you unhappy, then what you can do is you can start listing the things that would make you happy. So you shift it into more of what we call a positive need. So I don't like that I never get help around the house, then turns into I really need help around the house. And that can kind of lead into helping you to understand what is it that we're struggling with. And maybe with that example, it's that we haven't really sat down and figured out what are our roles in this relationship and who's responsible for what. But when you start to shift it into like what you actually want and what you actually need, that is a small shift that helps you to start to see what is the problem exactly between the two of you.
It seems like a lot of people must just skip that building block step of this is going to be your role, this is going to be my role. And maybe even if you had that conversation in the beginning, as things evolve, children come into the picture, different jobs come into the picture, that's not readdressed.
Exactly. And one thing that happens in relationships is that in the very beginning, we create unspoken contracts with each other. And I call them contracts because we really hold each other to it, even when life changes down the road. And so at the beginning of a relationship, there really aren't many stressors usually. Sometimes there are, but most of the time it's exciting and fun and full of love. And then so you're contracting that this is how we behave with each other. This is how we talk about things. This is what I expect of you. And this is what you can expect of me. And then a huge stressor comes up. And sometimes it's a happy stressor, like the introduction of a child or buying a new house or getting a new job and moving for it. And sometimes it's something more painful, like the loss of a family member or financial stress. And all of a sudden, people have to come together to decide how are we going to work through this stress together. And they can really surprise each other because they often do something very different than what they had maybe portrayed themselves to be in the very beginning. And that is usually where one of the first breakdowns in a relationship starts to show up.
Is there a way or a conversation to have when things start to change?
When you start to notice that things are getting stressful, it's really important that you do both inner work and outer work. So I say that both of those are important. And so inner work is having a conversation with yourself where you actually step back and you think, okay, so we're going through this really difficult situation and I don't want to be reactive in it because most of us are just reactive when stress happens. It's a normal human way to be in the face of anxiety. But if you step back and you think, okay, what do I need here? And I talk about that a lot. I know I've already said that in our call. You have to have a conversation with yourself where you can get clear on what you need in order to feel supported, what you think the situation needs, and how you're going to express that in a way that the other person can understand it. And what are you going to do to take care of yourself during this stressful time? Wow. And then the outer work is, how do I learn to express things in a way that helps someone want to work with me instead of pitting us against each other and making it seem like we're in competition for managing the stressor? So an example, if it's bringing a baby home, that's a really big one that can cause challenges. It's number one, being able to say, as my partner, I'm going to need A, B, and C so that I feel supported here. But then it's being able to express that in a way the other person can hear it, which isn't saying to them, you know, when I get home and the dishes are a mess, it makes me think that you don't care about me, but instead using something more gentle, like, hey, I'm really stressed. And whenever I see those dishes in the sink, it makes me so upset. I really need us to come up with a better way of dealing with this so that this transition into parenthood goes better. So learning again how to get clear with yourself and then also how to be clear with the other person.
I love that. That is such good advice. It might be easier said than done to get that into practice, but I want to go back to needs for a minute because you wrote this on Instagram and I loved this. If you criticize your partner, it is because you have an unmet need. It's an important and fundamental shift to begin speaking about your needs instead of their deficits. Tell me about that jump we make in our minds from our need to my partner's not showing up for me.
Yeah, so we all do it, including myself.
Yeah.
And really, it's very self-protective, right? So it's kind of primal to think this person, my need isn't being met. This person might be failing me. I have to protect myself. And what we do to protect ourselves, even though it serves a counter purpose, but what we do is we end up putting like armor with spikes on it. And we're like, get away from me. You're awful. You don't care about me enough to take care of me. And in doing that, we kind of feel like we're protecting ourselves. And again, it's subconscious. We're not thinking it through very much. The thing that actually ends up making us more protected and less likely to get abandoned is if we take that armor off and we're more vulnerable. But that isn't always human nature when we are feeling rejected, abandoned, ignored. And learning to recognize that we're criticizing someone, not because they're horrible, but because, and not because they are a failure or any of these other things, but because something's happening in the relationship that isn't meeting a need, is such a significant shift, because it does two things for you. One is it helps you to talk about the problem in a way the other person will actually hear it. If you criticize someone, they don't hear you, they don't know what you need, and then they become defensive. If you let someone know what you need, they can hear you a little bit better. The other thing it does is it empowers you. If the entire focus is on how bad your partner is with whatever problem it is in your relationship, then you have no empowerment there, because then everything is left up to your partner to become a better person. And you're kind of just stuck there waiting for that, angry about how awful they are, but just waiting for them to get better. If instead you shift it to, okay, maybe they're not a horrible person, but they're not meeting my need, then you can become empowered by discussing your need, setting boundaries, and taking a look at whether or not this person can ever really fulfill that need for you.
That's really good advice. And I can see that even going into maybe the workplace or other relationships you have.
Totally.
When you stop putting fault on other people.
Exactly. A big one is people just hate their bosses.
Yeah.
And we,
I think I said yeah too emphatically.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of bosses out there to hate. And the thing is, though, when you come home every day and you're saying, my boss is an idiot, my boss is horrible, my boss shouldn't have their job, you have lost complete power in that moment. You are giving them all the power, and you're saying, my life is miserable because this person sucks. And the moment that you instead say, I'm kind of really unhappy because my boss isn't able to meet my needs. My needs are that I have a better work-life balance, I need a better salary, I need this. Then all of a sudden you give responsibility back to yourself to figure that out. And that is scary and it can feel overwhelming, but it gives you choices. When your boss sucks and is horrible and all of this stuff, you're just kind of stuck in the fog of all of that, and you're not able to sit down and really look at what you need and then empower yourself to find a way to get it.
I love the empowerment of this. So let's talk about the other part of the equation, the communicating so that your partner can hear you. Are there words that you can lean toward, or words you want to try to avoid, or phrases you want to try to avoid when trying to construct how you're going to put to your partner, my need is this?
When you are bringing up a need, you want to use something called gentle startup, which is something that John Gottman has researched a lot, or nonviolent communication. They're both very similar. So you can look up either of those, and there are so many resources online. You can just print out the script of them. Gentle startup sounds like taking the problem as your own problem and being able to express it that way instead of making the problem the person that's across from you. And a really easy example that I give a lot is dirty dishes in the sink, because it's such a common example. But and maybe it's because it happens in my house a lot.
Yeah.
But when you come home at the end of the day, if you say to your partner, you never clean the dishes, the house is a wreck, then you're making the partner the problem. You're not making the dishes the problem. and the dishes are what the problem is. And actually, it's your problem, because if it was your partner's problem, they would have cleaned them. They would care enough to clean them. So you're the one that has the problem with the dishes, right or wrong, it's still your problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so when instead you come in the door and think about your partner as your ally, or you think about your coworker as your ally, or whoever it is, and you say, hey, I need to talk about something. Whenever I see the dishes that are dirty in the sink, it makes me, and you can be angry, you can be anything you want. It makes me so angry. It makes me so exhausted. I really need us to figure out a solution to this. Can you work with me? That type of startup to a conversation is much more likely to elicit someone that wants to work with you than the first one. The first example elicits defensiveness, and that never goes well. So the formula is, when I notice X, when I notice the dirty dishes, I feel blank. I feel sad. I feel angry. I feel whatever. I really need, and then again, you need to state those positive needs. So instead of saying, I need for the house not to be a mess anymore, you want to say, I need for this. I need the dishes to be cleaned. I need us to come up with a solution. And research has shown that when you start a conversation that way, it is much, much, much more likely to result in an experience of conversation that feels positive.
If you're the one listening to the need and you're recognizing this, how can you respond?
The other part of the equation is the other person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people will say to me, well, I have been using Gentle Startup and it's not working. And I always like to say, well, sometimes it isn't going to work because the other person doesn't want to work with you. But this is a great way for you to truly figure that out. So the other person, it's really important that they're not defensive. When people are defensive in conversations, it creates a ping pong effect. They're just serving a ball right back to the other person, and the other person serves it back, and it just becomes a really uncomfortable or chaotic conversation. So instead of being defensive, instead of saying things like, well, I'll clean the dishes when you start cleaning your car, or I had a busy day too, or yeah, you're right, but, and then giving some sort of excuse. You want to either validate the concern immediately before any other type of conversation starts, or take responsibility for your part. So validating in this example would sound like, you're right, I would feel so stressed out too if I just worked a 12-hour day and then I came in and saw dirty dishes. Taking responsibility would sound like, you're absolutely right, I have not done my part of the dishes. And I get why that upsets you. So just taking the smallest bit of responsibility disarms the other person. So any amount of porcupine that they might have still been feeling, that those quills, they just kind of retract even further, and it softens them. So if the first partner uses Gentle Startup and the other person validates or takes responsibility, the conversation just continues to get softer and softer.
It's amazing how simple this seems to bring into somebody's life, but I imagine it is still hard for couples to get on the same page. What have you seen there? How hard is it for them to come to the same place?
It's hard. And it's hard because our habits of communication are so ingrained that without even really thinking, we just get into cycles. When you know what to look for, it becomes a little bit easier. So when you know, okay, criticism is never going to work, I need to use Gentle Startup, even if internally you don't necessarily feel gentle towards your partner in that moment, those words, sometimes that like behavior that you do starts to help you shift your emotions anyway. So one of the first shifts I see in couples is the ability to just change their behavior first will then help them to change a lot more and will help them to become more soft so that they can begin to make change in their relationship. So I always tell people, if all you can do is just always start a conversation with Gentle Startup, things will shift a little bit. Or if every time you catch yourself being defensive, you say, oops, I'm sorry, I was defensive. Let me try again. You're totally right here, and I want to hear you. There are going to be shifts in that relationship that create much more trust. And couples can't compromise or change things for the better or come up with solutions when they don't trust each other. If you don't trust each other, then you're not partners. Again, you're competitive and you're out to protect yourself. So the softer you are and the more you just shift these little behaviors, the more trust you're building so that you can then get to a point where you can come up with better ways of being with each other, including cleaning the dishes effectively.
I love that idea, even mid-conversation, stopping and saying, I'm sorry, that's not what I wanted to say. I love that.
Yeah. When you do that, you build a lot of trust with people. That isn't just in relationships, even in the workplace or with your friends or your family. Being able to own up to the fact that you made a mistake, I think makes you more human. And it then allows other people to be more human with you as well, and more likely themselves to apologize and try things again.
It's kind of vulnerable.
It's vulnerability, and and that type of vulnerability says, hey, I am actually working with you here. This is about us, and I care about this interaction enough to try to mend what happened that probably harmed it.
If someone's listening thinking, okay, I've got to start this stuff, is there a conversation or something to get the ball rolling with their wife or with their husband?
Yeah, do gentle startup.
well, saying, hey, I want to try this new communication. Yeah. Like, should they sit down before they even start with the tools and say, look, I don't love the commute. Oh, okay. So I'm saying it. The gentle startup.
If you use gentle startup.
Yes, I got it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you caught yourself. We are so used to sitting down with somebody and saying, I don't like how we're managing the baby. I don't like how we do ABMC. And again, when people hear that, it's just how we're wired. What we hear is, I don't like how you're doing it. And then it's, well, I'm not a bad person. I need to defend myself. But yes, absolutely sit down with your partner to talk about what you would like to see change. So it might sound, again, like I've noticed that whenever we are stressed out during the week, that we don't talk very well and we get into arguments, and it makes me feel even more stressed. I bet it makes you feel more exhausted. I need us to start trying some things that I just heard about in this podcast or that I just read about. If you use that formula to bring up almost any issue, again, it really works wonders.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that I just had to talk through it to realize.
I love that.
Hopefully someone was there with me, not making the connection until I did. Okay, so I want to talk.
Was perfect.
I want to talk about fighting, because I think a lot of people, especially maybe in the early years, don't think fighting is okay or normal, or worried if they start fighting, that's going to lead to divorce. But fighting, is that okay? Is fighting okay in relationships?
Yeah, it's totally normal. You have I take a very humanistic approach to relationships. And the reality is, if you think about how amazing it is that two human beings can even like each other, it's pretty fascinating, because we grow up with, even if you're in the same culture, if you grow up in the same state, if you have the same type of socioeconomic status, you grow up in a different culture than your partner. And I think it's John Gottman who says that all relationships are cross-cultural relationships, because every single person has this intricate web of stories from their life that have influenced the way that they see how things should be, that have influenced the way that they think a relationship is. And then you decide that you're going to create a life with this other person. And over time, you learn that they are not just like you. And if you don't ever talk about that, and if you don't ever disagree, you never you never have a catalyst for reworking things as a couple. And so fighting or arguing or disagreeing in itself can actually be something that's really helpful, because it gives you this opportunity to rethink what you've always thought is the only way, or what you've always thought is the right way. the moment that you have a disagreement, all of a sudden you're being forced to think, maybe the way I thought things should be isn't the way everybody thinks things should be. Or maybe the way I've talked to people my entire life actually isn't always helpful. Or maybe the way I express love isn't the way that everyone expresses love. So the fight in itself isn't bad. It's the way that you fight. That's the problem. And research has shown that 2/3 of problems between couples are kind of unsolvable. And that's totally fine.
2/3.
Yeah, 2/3 are unsolvable because they come from core needs. And to solve them would mean that you have to just give up your core personality and your core need. So the problem isn't having unsolvable differences. The problem is that when couples aren't able to understand the other person, express empathy, come up with compromises that honor both people, then the relationship falls apart. When you can look at your partner and say, okay, I'm just kind of hanging out in this life with another person who's totally different than me. They did not see the things I've seen in my life. They have not heard the things I've heard in my life. And maybe their way of being is just as good as my way of being. And I want to understand it. It doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily agree with it, but I can validate it. I can understand it. I can respect them. Then those couples, they do very, very well. And those differences actually come up less and less over time because there's no power struggle between them anymore. It's not a struggle of my way is right and your way is wrong. It's we both are valid here. So how do we make life work between us so that neither of us has to give up something that really, really matters?
I've learned so much about just humans in general, being able to add my husband's perspective to what has been my perspective.
Yes.
Finding that common ground with those core needs. I guess I want to ask how to do that. Is it gentle startup?
Yeah. So those core needs will actually usually show themselves in the ugliest fights. And that is usually the first sign that there's a core need going on. If you're like, oh my gosh, why did we just fight like that? That isn't even us. That was horrible. Or why do we keep fighting about this? This is so weird. We keep fighting about, and usually it's something kind of dumb.
Yeah.
And it's just a symptom of something. So it's fighting over where to send your kid to school, or fighting over like what kind of food you cook or something like that, how you spend time with your friends, whatever. You keep having these big arguments. A moment to kind of step back and to then go up to your partner and again, use gentle startup and say, whenever this issue about so-and-so's schooling comes up, or whenever we talk about what we're going to do over the weekend, I've noticed we get in these huge fights and it feels awful. And I just want us to figure out what that is. And then that conversation can lead into saying something like, I want to be curious now. I'm sorry that we fought. And I'm sorry that I made the assumption maybe that my way is the best way. So if we're fighting like this, it must mean it's something important to you. And I want to understand why. So tell me a little bit about what you think is the best way to do this. I really want to know. And holding your tongue while they explain what they think. Because asking someone what they think and then interrupting them the entire time. Oh, no, that's not right. That's not what you said last time.
Start another fight.
Or it just starts another fight. And it makes it so that vulnerability is that much harder the following time. So really pretending like this person is the most interesting person in the world and that you really want to understand where this comes from. Why are you fighting about how laundry is done in such an explosive way? So then after they tell you what they believe, one of the most powerful questions is, can you tell me a little bit about how that was when you were growing up? So the example about school, tell me a little bit about, does the thing that you think we should do with our kids' school, is it related at all to when you were little? Is that what your parents did? Is it not what they did? And that actually is a really powerful moment for couples because they then depersonalize the entire thing. And there's usually this aha moment of, oh, this fight isn't about me. This fight is about either this person really wants to continue the way something was in their childhood because it felt really good to them, or they're trying as hard as they can to prevent something that felt really bad to them. And so this entire fight, this entire core need that they have is based off of their life experience and really a true desire to make sure that things are just as good or better than it was for them when they were little. And that's a pivotal moment between people. It's very powerful to watch.
Wow. So what about, I can understand the school thing. What about something like laundry? How does
Yeah.
laundry connect to a
So
core need?
it
Like what kind of
totally
core needs
connects.
could it be?
Yeah. So sometimes, you would say, okay, so we're always fighting because I I want the laundry done. I want it kept up, and then you don't do it, and then we start yelling at each other. And you say, well, what I believe is that people should keep up with their stuff. They should take good care of their stuff. And the other person says, well, I believe that you should relax in life and that who cares if you have messy stuff. And then you ask each of them, well, does that relate to something? And the person who says you should relax in life, perhaps they say something like, yeah, when I was little, nobody relaxed. My parents were constantly asking me to do chores and it sucked. And my life was just constant work. And I'm an adult and I escaped that and I just want to have fun. And the other person might say, well, when we were little, we didn't have anything. And so when I have nice things, I want to take good care of them. It totally shifts. It's
Yeah.
not about the stupid laundry. It's about the lens that you're looking at how you operate your life.
And I feel like talking about that with someone you love will hit your heart. And I love that. I love getting to the root of where it comes from.
Yeah, there's lots of tears usually.
Oh.
It's a sweet conversation.
Okay, now I'm going to go to the last question, although I do want to talk to you for the rest of the day. But this podcast is all about finding more joy in the everyday. What would your tip be to finding more joy in the everyday? The good, the bad, the in between.
Start noticing what you do like. And that's been the theme throughout this entire conversation, I feel like. So people are probably like, all right, lady, you're a broken record. But
sometimes you need to hear it in different ways to hear it.
Yeah. I think that our lives, everybody listening, I know your life is stressful in some way. Life is so fast and stressful and people want so much from you. And I think that at the end of the day, sometimes we just think, oh my gosh, this all sucked. Even before getting on this podcast, I was stuck it takes me an hour to get to work. I was stuck in traffic. My son didn't want to go into school. And if I got out of my car and I thought, I hate my drive, or I hate that my husband gets to leave in the morning before I do, and I'm the one stuck taking him to school, I don't like that. My life is not going to be very joyful. Instead, I either notice what I do like, and there was a lot I liked about this morning. I liked watching Paw Patrol with my son. I liked listening to a podcast in the morning. I liked that my husband and I were texting about a trip we're planning. I notice what I do like, or I notice what I need so that I can like a situation better. And the more that you start looking through that lens, it's not wrapping up something with a bow that doesn't need to be wrapped up in a bow. But what it is doing is it's, again, empowering you to recognize what's good or to recognize what you need to do to make it good. And for me personally, I'm a fairly joyful person. I like almost every day a lot. And I think it has been that shift, the ability to stop saying, I don't want or I don't like, and I do want and I do like.
It's such an easy, simple place to start as well. Thank you so much, Liz, for coming on. I absolutely love talking to you, and I'm so excited to share all of these tools with my listeners.
Thank you for having me. It was so fun to chat.
Amazing episode, right? I hope you loved it. I loved talking to Liz. Of course, I am linking all of her information. You can follow her on Instagram. You can see what her practice, Better Life Therapy, is all about. I will have that in show notes as well. Up next, I cannot wait to share with you an episode about positive psychology. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, but one of the really cool things is my guest is going to be sharing with you one thing you can do today that will help you start feeling better right now. I love the idea. I'm so excited to share it with you. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. And I want to thank you for being here on Happiness in Progress.